I'm Ellen Mercer, 74 years old, and the last time I saw my son's face before it all fell apart was at the reading of my husband's will. The lawyer had just unfolded the final page when Alex leaned forward. Eyes sharp, lips pressed into a line by the time he stood. The legs of his chair screeched against the wood, and his voice was like a crack through glass. "Sign. Everything over. Or this won't end well." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Lisa sat across from me, her hands folded neatly, her eyes unreadable. The room had gone quiet, like we were all waiting for someone to say it was a misunderstanding, but no one did. Alex's hands were fists on the table, his jaw tight, his voice strange and unfamiliar. I looked at him, and all I could think about was how small he used to be when he clung to my skirt in the grocery store. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever watched someone you love become someone you no longer recognize. I grew up in Missouri back when summers were sticky and long, and we played until the streetlights blinked on. My parents weren't wealthy, but they believed in good manners and hard work, and making do with what you had. My mother taught me how to hem a dress and stretch a meal to feed. 7, my father said. If you couldn't afford it, you didn't need it. When I met Charles Mercer, I was 23, working the register at a pharmacy. He was patient, soft-spoken, carried a worn leather wallet, and always asked how my day was. We got married the next year, bought a little house just outside town, built it up room by room over the decades, raised one child, a boy we named Alex. He was bright and sensitive, always asking questions and afraid of thunderstorms. Charles worked maintenance for the school district. I ran a sewing business, out of the den to bring in a little extra. We didn't have much, but we made it count. When Alex got older, he pulled away the way sons sometimes do. He left for college, then moved to Dallas. Married Lisa. She wore heels that never scuffed and said things like, "estate potential," the first time she walked through our front door. Charles thought she was cold. I said, "Give it time." Charles passed just after our 47th anniversary. Collapsed in the garden he'd planted from seed. He still wore the same watch every day, the one he bought when we were first married, with a cracked leather band and a dial that fogged when it rained. I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, while the machines beeped slow and steady, then not at all. The funeral was small. Alex gave a polite eulogy. Lisa wore black and checked her phone during the service afterward. Alex said he'd take care of everything, he said. I shouldn't worry about finances or the house or paperwork, he said. Just let me and Lisa handle it. And at the time, I thought it was kindness. But that day in the lawyer's office, when he stood and made his demand, when he looked at me, not as a son looks at his mother, but as a man staking a claim, I realized I had misunderstood. Lisa didn't say a word. She just watched me, like she already knew how this would end. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded once. They moved in the following week, and that's when the real erasing began. Lisa said it would just be until the estate paperwork was finalized. A couple weeks, maybe less, she told me, setting down a box labeled home office, as if that explained everything. But I watched them unload that truck labeled bins, garment bags, a standing mirror, even a rug rolled up and strapped in plastic. It didn't look temporary. It looked planned. They took the master bedroom. Lisa called it a natural transition. She said the upstairs suite was better for me anyway, quieter with its own bathroom. I stood in the hallway while she carried my sewing machine downstairs and leaned it against the guest room door. The framed photos that had sat on the dresser for decades, Charles in his garden, Alex at graduation, our wedding picture, disappeared overnight. In their place, she hung a wide canvas print of a faceless woman wearing a sun hat. The kitchen changed next. On the first morning I came down for tea and found Lisa already there. She was sorting the mail at the Marble Island. I set aside the bills, she said without looking up. Don't worry, Ellen. We'll take care of those now. She pushed a floral tin toward me. Your vitamins. I took the tin, not because I needed it, but because my hands didn't know what else to do. Alex walked in a moment later, wearing Charles's old robe. Found this upstairs, he said with a grin, tugging at the belt. Comfy, right? You don't mind, do you? He didn't wait for an answer. That afternoon, they took my credit cards. Lisa handed them to Alex like she was turning over lost property. You won't need these, he said gently, patting my hand. We've got it all under control. You can just enjoy yourself. I nodded. The upstairs suite used to be Charles's mother's room. Now Lisa had started calling it Grandma's space. I found my slippers tucked neatly under the bench, my perfume bottles lined up on the dresser like they were being inventoried. They had even changed the curtains. Gone were the lace panels I'd sewn myself. In their place, pale gray blackout drapes. At dinner, they sat across from me discussing their renovation plans. Lisa wanted to level the garden, start from scratch. Maybe raised beds and native plants, she said. We could turn the study into a wellness room, bring in some light, add a diffuser. I didn't say anything. My fork scraped against the plate, the sound louder than their laughter. Lisa glanced over. Too spicy, Ellen. We can keep it plainer next time. I nodded again. It was easier. That night, I walked the hallway alone. I paused at the wall where Charles's favorite painting used to hang. There was nothing there now but clean space. I stood for a long time in front of the glass door that led to the back garden. My reflection looked small and pale. I touched the glass with my fingertips, but the night stayed silent. I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, like the walls were pressing in. I drifted through rooms past boxes and rearranged furniture. I ended up in the old study. Most of the books had been packed away. There were stacks of donation boxes labeled with permanent marker. Under Charles's desk, there was a small panel he'd built years ago. Just something to stash birthday cards and old letters. I hadn't opened it since he passed. Inside was a wooden box worn at the edges. I pulled it out, sat on the floor, and lifted the lid. Letters. Dozens of them. Charles's handwriting on every envelope. Some dated back to the year we were married. A few from when Alex was little. One in the middle was marked, "For Ellen, when you need it most." I opened it slowly. His words were steady, just like I remembered. If you're reading this, I know something has gone wrong. I always told you you give too much of yourself and forget to save some for you. You built this life. You have every right to protect it. Don't let anyone, not even Alex, take it from you. You are stronger than you believe. I sat there for hours reading letter after letter. Some were short, some longer. All of them reminded me of who we were, who I was. When I stood to leave, dawn light was starting to stretch across the room. I tucked the letters into the box and slid it under my bed. When I saw Lisa in the kitchen that morning, flipping through catalogs, and Alex walking through the hall with a clipboard, I felt different. They didn't notice, but something had shifted. There was a quiet pulse inside me now that hadn't been there before. I stayed in my room most of that day. I took Charles's letter and placed it under my palm like a promise. I whispered his words out loud until I could say them without shaking. That evening, I opened the drawer of my old nightstand and pulled out a worn address book. I hadn't touched it in years. I turned through the pages slowly, fingers brushing over names I hadn't spoken aloud since Charles's retirement party. When I got to Martha's name, I stopped. We'd met when I was 19. She was the one who introduced me to Charles. I dialed the number without thinking. My hands trembled. She picked up on the third ring. Ellen. My God, it's been forever. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat closed up. I could barely breathe. Ellen? Are you okay? That's when the tears came. I told her everything. The will, the house, the credit cards, the robe. I told her about the letters, about how I couldn't sleep, about how I felt like I was disappearing. There was silence. Then her voice, steady and calm. You should have called me sooner. You are not alone. I know someone, a lawyer. Julia. She's discreet. She's helped women in situations like yours. I said I didn't know what to do, that I felt erased. You don't have to know. You just have to be willing to start. Martha said, I'll make the call. When I hung up, I sat with the address book in my lap. Lisa was laughing downstairs. Alex was pouring wine. I could hear the clink of glasses. I closed the drawer gently, pressed Charles's letter to my chest. The next morning, I woke before dawn again. The air was still and gray. I crept downstairs and opened the old file cabinet in what used to be my office. They hadn't emptied all of it. I found account statements, insurance forms, tax records tucked behind envelopes and old receipts. I wrapped them in the scarf Charles gave me on our 25th anniversary and hid them under the bed next to the letters. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced saying no. At first, I couldn't meet my own eyes, but I kept trying, over and over, until the word didn't shake when it came out of my mouth. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Lisa was out. Alex was at lunch. I opened the door and saw a woman in a blue raincoat. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She smiled. Ellen, I'm Julia, a friend of Martha's. I stepped back and let her in. She handed me a business card. Julia Nean, attorney at law. We sat at the dining table, mine, but no longer mine. I tried to speak, but the words caught. She waited, patient and calm. I told her everything, beginning to end. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, my hands were shaking under the table. She reached out and held them. You are not crazy, she said, and you are not alone. And for the first time since Charles died, I almost believed her. Julia stayed until the rain let up. We sat side by side at the dining table while thunder rolled far off in the distance. The same table where Lisa once spread out flooring samples and Alex drew a sketch of how they'd knock out the back wall. That day, the table held quiet. Instead, 2 mugs of tea, the edges of old documents I'd tucked away, and Julia's small leather notebook open and steady in front of her. We moved slowly. She asked careful questions, always in the same even tone. When I hesitated, she let me. When I spoke, she listened without blinking. I showed her the scarf-wrapped bundle of paperwork I'd hidden under my bed. Bank statements, deed copies, insurance policies. Some were decades old, others more recent, printed on thinner paper with ink already fading. She laid them out, gently smoothing each one with her palm. This is more than enough, she said. You've done more than you realize. She returned 2 mornings later. I met her at the door before Alex and Lisa were awake. She wore the same black coat and this time carried a slim folder with a metal clasp. We moved quietly to the back room, the one that used to be Charles's den. The curtains were drawn. A low lamp buzzed in the corner. She set the folder on the desk and opened it. This is a revocation of power of attorney, she said, placing the first page in front of me. Once this is signed and filed, Alex no longer has any legal access to your account's property or decisions. She tapped the second page. This establishes a protective trust. You'll hold sole control and no one, not Alex, not Lisa, Not anyone can touch it without your signature. I stared at the forms. The words swam for a moment. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. She didn't speak again, didn't rush me. The pen sat beside the signature line. My hand hovered, then pulled back. I looked up. Her eyes didn't waver. I signed. When it was done, she gathered the pages like something precious, sliding them back into the folder with practiced care. "That's the hard part," she said softly. Now we wait for the moment to act. Later that same afternoon, the front door slammed. Alex's voice echoed down the hall. "Mom." I had just finished placing my signed copies in a new hiding spot in the bottom drawer of Charles's tool chest under a rusted wrench and an old level. I turned the key and tucked it into my apron pocket. By the time he walked into the den, I was already standing. He stopped in the doorway. "What's that?" His eyes locked on the stack of folders in my arms. My instinct was to say nothing, to shift, to step aside, but I stayed still. "What are those?" he said again, his voice tighter. I held the papers a little closer. "Just personal files." He stepped forward. "Let me see them." "No." The word came out low firmer than I expected. His face twitched. "Excuse me." I stood straighter. I said no. For a long second, he didn't move. Then he narrowed his eyes and took another step toward me. "You're not thinking clearly. You've been under stress. I can help, Lisa, and I just want to help. I've already made arrangements," I said. My voice felt calm. My hands didn't shake. He blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. "You're making a mistake. I know exactly what I'm doing." We stood there, the silence thick between us. Then he turned on his heel and left the room. I heard the front door bang shut. Julia emerged a moment later from the hallway. She had waited nearby in case things turned. I didn't know she'd stayed, but I was glad she had. She held another folder in her hand. "It's time," she said. By the time I reached the entryway, Alex was already storming back inside. He stopped short when he saw Julia standing by the staircase. "Who are you?" "I'm Ellen's legal counsel." She held out the folder. "This is a restraining order, effective immediately. You are to vacate the property today." He looked at the papers, then back at her. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't know what she's doing." "You're manipulating her." I stepped forward. He turned toward me, waiting for me to deny it, to explain, to backpedal. "I didn't. Leave my house." "Mom," I said, "leave." His shoulders dropped. For a moment, I thought he might cry, but he didn't. He looked at the papers again, his hands trembling slightly as he picked them up. "You'll regret this." I said nothing. He left. The house was still after the door shut, not quiet in the way it had been, not hollow, just still. Julia put a hand on my arm. "You did it." I nodded. When she finally left, I stood in the entryway for a long time. Then I slid down to the floor, folded in on myself. The tears came fast, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I hadn't let anyone touch in years. I didn't stop them. I didn't try to fix them. I cried for Charles. I cried for the years that had slipped past. I cried for the woman I used to be before I disappeared into someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's obligation. I cried for Alex. Not the man who left. The boy he used to be. The one who held my hand in grocery stores and asked me to stay until he fell asleep. When the tears dried, I stood. I walked to the mirror in the hall. I looked at myself. Not just a glance. I really looked. The next day, Julia came again. She brought a new folder thicker than the last. "Everything's in place now," she said. "Your house, your accounts, the trust. It's all finalized. Nobody touches anything without your signature." She reached for another page. "And I included the community fund for Charles." I looked up. "The one you told me about, the scholarship program, the Rose Garden restoration. It's all written in." I picked up the pen again. My signature was steadier this time. When it was done, I looked out at the garden through the den window. The roses had been trimmed back too far. A few petals clung stubbornly to the stems. I sat for a while at the piano after Julia left. I hadn't played in years. The notes came out slow and uncertain, but they filled the house. That night, I slept with the window cracked open. The breeze smelled like soil and lilacs. I kept the folder beside my bed, and just before I turned out the light, I whispered to Charles. I kept my promise. The sun was just beginning to dip below the tree line when I heard voices outside the gate. I stood in the upstairs hallway with the lights off, watching from behind the sheer curtain. Alex was pacing near the driveway, phone in one hand, the other rubbing at the back of his neck. Lisa stood next to him, arms crossed tight over her chest, her voice sharp even through the glass. "They didn't see me." Lisa pointed toward the house with clipped gestures. Alex tried to answer her, but she cut him off. The kind of back and forth that didn't need words to be understood. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to reclaim control. I stepped away from the window and walked slowly toward Charles's old study. The French doors opened to the balcony, the same one where he used to sip his morning coffee and wave to neighbors passing by. I paused with my hand on the doorframe, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I opened the doors and stepped out. The air was cool, the kind that sits still before the crickets start. I rested my hands on the wooden railing. The house behind me stood quiet, untouched. Below, Lisa spotted me first. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Alex turned, following her gaze. "Mother," he called, voice straining to sound calm. "We just want to talk." Lisa cut in louder. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Let us in." I didn't answer right away. I looked past them out toward the line of oak trees at the edge of the yard. The leaves had started to change, just a hint of gold along the edges. Alex took a step closer to the gate. "Please," he said. "This isn't how it's supposed to go. Just open the door." Lisa raised her voice. "You don't understand what you're doing. This house, none of this is going to work without us. You're being stubborn for no reason." I stood tall and kept my voice level. "No." The word was quiet, but it carried. Lisa blinked. Alex's shoulders slumped. Lisa stepped forward, hands clenched at her sides. "We're your family. You owe us at least a conversation." "I don't owe you anything." The silence that followed felt wide and still. Alex looked down at the ground. Lisa's jaw tightened. She spun on her heel, stormed toward the car, and slammed the door without another word. The engine turned over, and the tires crunched over gravel as she pulled away. Alex stayed there a moment longer. He moved to sit on the low stone wall near the sidewalk, head in his hands. I watched from the balcony, my fingertips resting against the edge of the rail. The sky behind him shifted to purple, the garden bathed in fading light. After a while, he stood. The papers he'd brought were still clutched in his hand, folded and bent from his grip. He didn't look back when he walked away. That night, the house was quiet in a different way. Not heavy or hostile, just still. I moved through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs the side of the doorframe where we'd marked Alex's height when he was a boy. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just steady. A few days passed without a word. No calls, no knocks at the door. I filled the time by clearing out the guest closet, sorting through old linens, and folding them neatly into boxes. I rearranged the front sitting room, pulling Charles's armchair back into its place by the window. In the evenings, I lit a small candle and sat near the piano, letting the quiet notes fill the space before bed. It was Julia who called first. "She's filed for divorce," she said. "Lisa, she's already left, staying with a friend downtown." I stood in the kitchen, the phone tucked between my shoulder and ear, staring at the backsplash tile we'd chosen 20 years ago. "And Alex?" He checked into a motel just outside of town. "Nothing permanent yet. It looks like he's trying to figure out his next steps." I didn't speak right away. Julia waited. Her voice stayed even. "You're safe," she said. "Everything is holding." I thanked her and hung up. Outside, the rose garden had started to grow wild again. I walked the perimeter slowly, pulling a few weeds by hand. Charles used to fuss over those beds every weekend. He hated gloves, said he needed to feel the soil to know what it needed. I could almost picture him there, hunched over a bloom, brushing a beetle from the stem. Later that afternoon, I took the community fund binder from the bookshelf and sat at the dining table. Julia had labeled the tabs in clean handwriting: scholarships, garden projects, youth mentorship. I opened the folder to the first page and read through the mission statement we'd drafted together. The words felt right. The next morning, I picked up a fresh can of paint and began working on the hallway trim. The old color had faded in places, worn down from years of sunlight and passing hands. I worked slowly, brushing long, careful strokes along the baseboards. The smell of fresh paint filled the space. By midweek, I'd made a list for the hardware store: new cabinet handles, a replacement light fixture for the front porch. I circled items with a pencil, thinking through each change one at a time. I made tea around mid-afternoon and sat with the catalog on my lap. The house was still, peaceful. That evening, I stood by the front door and watched the light fade through the trees. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. I didn't check the driveway. The silence no longer felt like something missing. It felt like space. The day Julia handed me the final paperwork felt like crossing a quiet line. She came early before the sun was fully up and settled in my kitchen with a strong cup of coffee and a stack of documents thicker than anything we'd worked on before. The morning light filtered through the windows, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. I spread the papers out on the table: trust agreements, property, deeds, bank authorizations, all bearing my name clear and firm. Julia's voice was steady as she explained each page, her fingers tracing the lines like she was guiding me through a familiar ritual. "This," she said, tapping a document near the top of the pile, "is the protective trust. Everything you own is now under your sole control. No one can touch a thing without your explicit consent." I watched her eyes, searching for any hint of doubt or hesitation. There was none. I ran my fingers over the papers, feeling the weight of them like a promise. This wasn't surrender. It was reclaiming. She paused and then added quietly, "I included the community fund you and Charles talked about. Scholarships, garden restoration projects, everything we discussed." I looked up sharply. The memory of Charles came back in a rush. His quiet talks about giving back to the town we loved, scribbled notes on napkins at the kitchen table, dreams bigger than either of us. I picked up the pen, heart steady this time, and signed. After Julia left, I spent the afternoon walking through the house alone. I opened Charles's closet and found his gardening gloves folded just like he left them. I pressed them to my face, breathing in the faint scent of earth and old leather. The garden outside was quiet, the rose bushes trimmed, but still alive, waiting for someone to care. That evening, I sat at the piano, My fingers hesitated over the keys before pressing down, tentative and unsure. The notes filled the room, imperfect, but real. It was the first time in years the house felt like mine again. The next morning brought unexpected sounds, a car pulling up, voices near the gate. I watched from the window and saw Alex and Lisa pacing, frustration clear in their movements. I didn't answer when they knocked or called. I didn't open the door. Instead, I went to Charles's study and stepped out onto the balcony. The evening air was cool and sharp against my skin. I rested my hands on the railing, steady and sure. Alex's voice broke the quiet. "Mother, please, we want to talk." Lisa's words followed sharper. "Let us in. You don't understand what you're doing." I looked at them not as a frightened woman, but as someone who had found her strength. "No." Alex's shoulders sagged. Lisa's face twisted with anger, but I didn't flinch. "We're your family," Lisa said. "You owe us." I shook my head slowly. "I don't owe you anything." They left without another word. The driveway grew still and quiet. Inside, I stood by the window and watched the sun set behind the oak's colors fading to deep purple. The house was silent, but it was mine. I had taken my first bold step back. The morning sunlight was soft when Julia arrived, her steps quiet on the porch. She carried a thick folder and wore a calm expression that made the tension in my shoulders ease a little. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Alex once told me I was too frail to manage the house on my own. Julia laid out the papers carefully, a restraining order, legal documents that would give me the power to reclaim my life in full. My eyes traced the words dense and unfamiliar, but Julia's presence made it feel manageable. "This is the moment," she said softly. "Once you sign, everything changes." The pen felt heavy in my hand. I thought about the years I had let myself disappear. The dinners I had swallowed in silence, the way Alex's voice had cut through the house like a storm. My breath caught. I wasn't sure if I could do this, but then I saw Julia's steady gaze and remembered Charles's letters. I thought of the woman I used to be, strong, stubborn, unafraid to stand her ground. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed. Almost immediately, the front door slammed open. Alex's face was red, his steps loud and angry as he stormed into the room. His eyes locked onto the folder in my hands. "What's that?" he demanded. I stood my ground, holding the papers tight. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, voice low and warning. "You're making a mistake." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He lunged toward me, reaching for the papers. "No," I said, stepping back. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Son and mother, locked in a silent battle, neither wanted, but both forced into. Then Alex turned and stormed out. Julia appeared beside me, calm and composed. She handed Alex the restraining order and told him he had to leave the house immediately. His protests fell on deaf ears. He looked broken, defeated, and for the first time, I saw him not as my son, but as a man who had lost control. When he finally left the house, felt different, lighter, quieter. I sank to the floor in the entryway, tears slipping down my cheeks as years of pain poured out all at once. Julia sat quietly beside me, her presence a steady comfort. In the days that followed, I found myself waking with a new sense of purpose. Julia visited, often bringing folders filled with documents, strategies, and plans. Together, we organized everything, turning chaos into order. One afternoon, she laid out the documents that finalized the trust in my name. "Your house, your accounts, everything," she said softly. "No one can touch a thing without your consent." She paused, then added, "And the community fund. For Charles. It's all included." I looked up, heart swelling. The dream Charles had carried, the scholarships, the garden restoration. It was real now, part of my legacy. I signed the papers with a steady hand, feeling a quiet pride. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue. The house, once a place of sorrow and betrayal, felt like home again. I breathed in the cool air, the scent of earth and lilacs drifting through the open window. I whispered into the dusk, I kept my promise. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It was nearly dusk when I heard the car pull up outside. The house was quiet, no television, no music, just the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I moved to the window and peered through the lace curtain. Alex and Lisa stood on the other side of the gate, voices low and urgent. Lisa's posture was rigid, her arms crossed and jaw set. Alex paced, shoulders hunched, a bundle of papers clutched in his hands. They stayed like that for a while, arguing in the fading light, neither one willing to back down. I watched them from the shadows of the hallway, letting the silence in the house settle around me. When Lisa spotted me at the window, she pointed toward the house and called out, her voice sharp, carrying easily across the yard. "Ellen, open the door. We need to talk." Alex echoed her softer but just as desperate, "Please, Mom, just let us in." I didn't answer right away. I walked through the house, every step deliberate, and out onto the balcony off Charles's study. The air was cool and the sky was streaked with purple and rose. Lisa's words came again, clipped and hard. "You don't understand what you're doing. Let us inside before you make things worse for everyone." Alex reached for the latch on the gate, but let his hand fall away. I kept my voice steady as I spoke down to them. "No, I won't open the door." Lisa's face twisted in anger. "We're your family. You owe us some respect." I shook my head. "I don't owe you anything." The words hung in the air, heavier than the dusk settling over the yard. Lisa turned without another word, stormed to the car, and slammed the door. The engine started, and she backed out fast, gravel kicking up under the tires. Alex didn't move at first. He stared down at the bundle in his hands, legal papers still creased and torn from the last argument. He sank onto the curb near the end of the drive, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with the effort it took not to break down. I stood at the balcony until the light faded, watching as he finally stood, gathered what was left of his dignity, and walked slowly down the sidewalk, disappearing around the bend. When the yard was empty, I went back inside and closed the balcony doors. The house was filled with the gentle hush that comes after a storm. I walked through each room, touching the things I'd reclaimed, a photograph of Charles, the old Afghan I'd mended more times than I could count, the piano keys that still held the echo of long-ago music. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and waited for it to boil, my reflection wavering in the window above the sink. A day passed, then another. There were no more calls, no more knocks at the door. It was Julia who phoned next. Her tone was gentle, as if she were delivering news she'd known was coming for some time. "Lisa's filed for divorce. She's left town, staying with a friend in the city. Alex is in a motel on the outskirts trying to sort himself out." I listened to her words, each one landing softly in the quiet of my kitchen. "It's over now, Ellen. You're safe." After we hung up, I wandered the halls. The silence was deep, but it no longer felt like loss. It was a space where new things might grow. I picked up the binder for the Charles Mercer Community Fund and paged through the planned scholarships, garden restoration projects that would last beyond my years. That evening, I stood at the back window as the sky turned to night. I didn't wait for headlights in the drive. I didn't expect anyone to come to the door. The house was finally my own again. The days slipped by gently, each one bringing a little more ease, a little more light. I made lists for the hardware store, new paint cabinet handles, seed packets for the roses. Some mornings I found myself humming as I worked a quiet tune from a time before all the trouble. In the evenings, I sat by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watched the stars appear one by one. The house, for so long a place of sorrow and confusion, now stood peaceful and steady around me. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope for what might come next. The days after Alex and Lisa left settled into a gentle rhythm. The house felt bigger and brighter, the quiet no longer sharp or lonely, but peaceful in its own way. Each morning, I opened the curtains and let in the sun, dust motes drifting across the living room, just as they had when Charles first carried me over the threshold so many years ago. I found comfort in small routines, watering the garden, running my fingers along the piano keys, folding fresh linens for the guest room, even if no one was coming to stay. Sometimes I would pause by the window mug in hand and watch the roses sway in the breeze. Their color seemed deeper now, as if the earth itself had taken a long breath and settled. The phone rang less often, and when it did, it was Julia checking in or Martha calling to see if I needed anything from town. The old fears and doubts faded like the last traces of winter, replaced by something quieter. Acceptance, maybe? Or just a kind of ease. I kept Charles's letters tucked safely in their wooden box, but I didn't feel the need to read them every night. His words had become part of me. Sometimes, when I sat at the kitchen table planning a new project for the community fund, I could almost hear his voice in the room, steady and encouraging, reminding me that what we built together was worth protecting. I never heard from Lisa again. Word traveled through Martha that she'd found a small apartment in the city and started over. Alex sent one letter months later. It was short, just a few lines written in a familiar hand, saying he was sorry for the pain he'd caused and that he hoped someday I would forgive him. I folded it away, unsure if I would ever answer, but I was grateful for the quiet that followed. Some endings don't need words. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and listen to the soft sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. I watched the sky turn from gold to blue, then to darkness, pricked with stars. I felt a kind of pride in what I had survived, not just for standing up to those who tried to take what wasn't theirs, but for remembering that my story was still my own to finish. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Maybe you've had to reclaim something of your own. A house, a bit of dignity, the right to be heard. I hope you remember it's never too late to choose yourself, to find strength you thought was gone, and to build a life that's finally quietly yours. If this story touched you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts or memories in the comments, or simply let someone you trust know you're listening. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you know where to find me. Take care and be gentle with yourself.